All right, so we've got a really unique deep dive set up for you today.
Yeah, we've got a pretty diverse collection of sources on the artist Bob Camblin.
It's a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Excerpts from a book of his quotes. We've got a standard biography. There's this YouTube transcript about one of his paintings that we'll get into, and then a book review that actually talks about his overall approach to art.
We even have a foreword from another book that features his art, so quite a bit to get through.
And we'll sprinkle in some extra little biographical snippets along the way. Oh, and there's a quote from someone who actually knew him. Should be fascinating.
But we're talking about Bob Camblin here, a real iconoclast, hard to categorize, kind of enigmatic.
He's one of those artists who just sort of sparks curiosity, doesn't he? He seemed to avoid the spotlight. His work is pretty rare, and when it does surface, there's a ton of demand, and he blends, well, humor and some really deep ideas.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix, to be sure.
So, I guess the best place to start might be with his own words.
Oh.
Right. Let's jump into Bob Camblin quotes and other mysteries. I'm just looking at this. Some of these are, well, they're almost paradoxical. Like, fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years, perhaps.
It's funny, isn't it? Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years perhaps. Like, it's not just that nothing lasts. It's like he's pointing out how much we want things to be permanent, even though we know everything's always changing.
Right. Like poking fun at that desire for stability.
A playful kind of skepticism about anything being truly fixed.
And you see these themes weaving their way through his quotes, like this blurring of science and magic. Look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic, and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both. He's putting them on almost equal footing.
As if he saw a connection there, a kind of unity in how we seek knowledge, how we make meaning out of things.
Exactly. Like science has its ways. But magic and art, they also lead us to discoveries.
To creative insights, yeah.
And then there's this whole idea of the perfectly average, like striving for that in order to actually appreciate miracles. I will stick with common sense and try for the perfectly average view of the universe. I think that will let me enjoy miracles on both sides of science and magic. It's like he's saying the more complex view actually makes it harder to see the extraordinary.
Maybe it's about shedding our preconceptions, right? Maybe the average view allows us to be more open to the remarkable stuff.
Like the things we might otherwise miss if we're too busy overthinking everything.
It's possible.
And then there's this emphasis on intuition, which comes up again and again.
Yeah.
The sixth sense is to be, without a doubt, senza dubio. No doubt. A pretty strong statement about just trusting your gut.
There's a sense of going beyond just the purely rational there. Maybe it's that initial spark of creativity that artists talk about, where you just know something's right.
Even if you can't fully explain it.
Right. A real trust in that intuitive subconscious level.
And you can't miss this deep connection to nature in his quotes. Find something in nature that completes you and then surrender. It's like finding your place, but then letting go.
Becoming part of something bigger than yourself, yeah. Accepting that interconnectedness.
Absolutely. And he keeps coming back to these little motifs, these nuggets of wisdom. So many of his quotes, this idea of balance between opposites. In the balance, patience, and yet freedom again, and yet in silence.
It's a constant tension, right? It's never just one or the other.
Right. Like patience without freedom is meaningless. And maybe that space of silence, that's where real understanding emerges, or at least creativity.
It's a really nuanced view.
And even his thoughts on art itself are really thought-provoking. Art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake. It feels like he's rejecting this detached view of art.
Yeah. It's not just something separate, something to be admired from afar. For him, it seems deeply connected to life itself, to personal experience, even this basic need to survive.
It makes art seem almost essential.
Absolutely.
And his perspective on the creative process. When you think, don't act. When you act, don't think. It's very direct, very clear.
It's like he's reminding us that they're separate modes. Thinking is for planning, analyzing. Acting is more immediate.
More intuitive, maybe.
Yeah. Don't overthink it.
Let it flow. And then there's these little moments that almost feel like haiku, where he captures these sensory details. The cosmos waves as me with tree leaves. Sun-heated air moves across the electrons of my skin. Sunlight reflects those greens. First white, then yellow-green, and in deep shadows blue. It's like he's transcribing a direct experience.
A very vivid one. As an artist, he seems to be taking in everything.
Finding beauty in the everyday. And I don't know, I feel like there's this underlying existential questioning in so many of his quotes, this acceptance of impermanence. Even when, like, the gate stays open, the fence is broken, he keeps searching, but does not know the size of his quarry. Yet he has faith. He looks in all directions, if he could only see all around all at once.
There's a real sense of searching there, isn't there? And maybe that search itself is the point.
Yeah. Even if we never fully grasp what we're seeking. Okay, so we've got this glimpse into his mindset through his own words. Now, let's fill in some background. We've got the biography, Bob Camblin, biography.pds, and then Bob Camblin, Incomplete Works, Volume 1. So born in Oklahoma in 1928, and it sounds like art was just part of his life from the very beginning.
Both of his parents were artists, so he was immersed in that world.
And it seems like a pretty natural progression. He studied at the Kansas City Art Institute, and then in 1955, he gets a Fulbright scholarship to Italy.
Can you imagine a young artist surrounded by masterpieces, immersed in Italian culture?
Must have been incredibly formative. And then when he comes back, he actually starts teaching at various universities, Ringling School of Art, the University of Illinois, the University of Detroit, the University of Utah.
He ends up at Rice University in Houston.
So he wasn't just off in a studio somewhere. He was really engaged with the art world.
Yes, teaching, exhibiting, but then comes this big shift. In 1976, he just decides to become a nomad.
Really radical, actually. He gave up a stable career to just travel and create.
It speaks to a deep need for exploration, for constant stimulation. He funded his travels by selling his work.
Italy, France, Ireland, Mexico, even the South Pacific.
All these experiences feeding into his art.
Amazing. And we see this collaborative side of him in Houston during the 60s and 70s, working with people like Earl Staley and Joe Tate. They did collaborative shows under names like B&E Productions and The Holding Firm. It feels like they were breaking down those traditional barriers, you know?
Yeah, it was less about the individual artist and more about the creative process itself.
And they even referred to what they did as events. It was about the act of making art, the shared experience.
Exactly. And then you have this really intriguing period in the 80s where he's working with Nancy Giordano on this style called mouches volantes.
Mouches volantes? What does that even mean?
Literally, it translates to flying flies. Apparently, it refers to those little floaters you sometimes see in your vision.
Oh.
And they use this as the basis for a style that was all about optical illusions. Very similar to what artists like Escher and Dali were doing, playing with perception.
So he was always experimenting with form, with how we see the world. And then there's that really interesting thing where he would often sign his work anonymous or anonymous artists.
Right, downplaying the individual ego, shifting the focus away from himself.
It's almost like he was saying, it's not about me, it's about something larger. Okay, so now let's look at a specific piece. We have this YouTube transcript. Cuidado, King the Longhorn, an ox-herding journey, along with an excerpt from Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, Volume 2. The painting itself sounds pretty captivating. A woodland waterfall, a dark pool reflecting everything, a rock that almost looks like a face, and then there's this multi-eyed being.
It sounds like a very symbolic image. And the transcript links it directly to that first picture in the Zen ox herding series.
The one where the seeker is searching for the ox, right? Which I guess symbolizes truth or due to nature.
Right. And the idea is that the seeker is often looking everywhere without realizing how close the ox actually is.
So the longhorn in this painting, that's the ox. It's already there in the landscape, but the seeker might not see it yet.
Exactly. And the whole environment, the woodland waterfall, it becomes this symbol of the spiritual journey, the path towards enlightenment. But then you have that word, cuidado.
Which means caution, right?
Right, it's in Spanish. And then there's that multi-eyed being. Like there's a subtle warning there. Like this journey isn't always going to be easy. There might be illusions along the way.
So the feeling is both serene with the waterfall and everything, but also mysterious. You never know what you're going to encounter.
And the transcript actually mentions several influences on this piece. Romantic landscapes like Friedrich, symbolism, surrealism like Blake and Ernst, and of course the whole Zen tradition.
So you've got this mix of influences, and it all comes together in this painting, with this feeling of serenity mixed with mystery. Like even in this tranquil setting, there's a sense of the unknown.
And maybe a suggestion that we're often too focused on the search itself to recognize the truth that might already be right there in front of us.
Okay, let's bring in some of the ideas from this book review of The Art of Everything. The review says Camblin's art is about questions disguised as images. It's not just pretty pictures, there are deeper layers.
The review points to all these seemingly ordinary objects that he uses in his work, and they're all loaded with symbolism.
Like a figure-4 trap or a tattooed arm.
Even a frog. They all point to something beyond their literal meaning.
And the review talks about the paradoxes in his sketches, too. Like traps that don't actually trap anything.
Oh.
Or structures that can't move.
He was playing with our expectations, making us question things.
Okay, so now let's look at this forward from Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, Volume 1. It talks about how art movements have evolved over time, from realism to abstract expressionism.
Yeah.
And it draws this really interesting connection to Zen in the I Ching.
There are definite parallels there. The shift in art towards more intuitive and abstract forms really aligns with Zen's focus on direct experience and the I Ching's view of reality as always changing. It's not about trying to represent the world exactly as it is.
Right. It's more about capturing an essence. And the forward explains how Camblin takes these abstract forms and combines them with symbolic motifs. So it's not just one or the other. It's this deliberate combination.
He wasn't trying to give you easy answers. He wanted you to really engage with the work.
To contemplate it. To find your own meaning. The forward even calls his art a portal, like a gateway to a different way of seeing.
It's very much in line with the whole idea of seeking enlightenment, of exploring your inner landscape.
We've also got these really great quotes about Camblin from different people. Earl Staley, the artist we mentioned earlier who actually worked with him, talks about how Camblin taught him these fundamental principles of drawing and composition.
That he still uses today.
And he describes Camblin as a gregarious storyteller, always questioning everything.
He also described Camblin's studio as wizard's den, filled with all these objects he collected. It really paints a picture of a very curious, unconventional mind.
Drawing inspiration from everywhere.
Yeah.
And then we have Penny Serling, another artist who knew him, who talks about how much he loved collaborations.
She mentions how those collaborations would often lead to these really intense discussions, questions, even arguments.
But ultimately, they led to new ideas, new ways of creating, sometimes successful, sometimes not. But it shows how open he was to different viewpoints.
How he thrived on that back and forth. So, as we come to the end of this deep dive, what are some of the big takeaways? What stands out to you?
Well, it's hard to miss the constant exploration of paradox. He just loves to present these contradictory ideas, forcing us to think differently.
Absolutely. And that ties in with the whole search for truth and meaning, often with a spiritual dimension to it. There's that Zen influence.
And then there's this constant play with illusion versus reality. It makes you question what's actually real and what we just perceive as real.
The connection between his art and spirituality is really central, too.
Art as a tool for self-discovery, for becoming more aware.
And then there's that collaborative spirit, that sense of mystery that surrounds him. It all adds up to a very unique and complex artistic identity.
And what's so interesting is his work never really gives you the answers. It's like he's inviting you to find your own meaning within it.
It's a process of discovery, like the path towards enlightenment, never ending. So we've journeyed through this fascinating world of Bob Camblin today, thanks to these amazing sources.
We've learned so much about his way of thinking, his artistic development.
And the philosophical ideas that underpin his work.
So as we leave you, we'd like to leave you with this question. If Camblin's art is all about questions disguised as images, what do you think is the one question he's most persistently asking? Of the world, of himself, and maybe even of you. We encourage you to go back to these resources or maybe even explore Zen philosophy and contemporary art further. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.